Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
And we're back, and we are getting ready to move into our first conversation for this morning, where our focus is on the tourism industry. We know that the tourism sector took a massive blow, and with the opening of the local tourism travel, we want to find out just what the expectations are and what's happening in that sector. So we have with us the Executive Director of the Belize Tourism Industry Association, John Burgess, and we have the second Vice President for the BTIA, Stuart Crone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
I got to start off and say, of course, we're most jealous of you, Stuart, because you get to be in Placencia to have this interview.
We've learned a lot about technology just because of this virus.
We all have. And, well, you know, I think let's just start with the overview. I know, John, the last time we talked, you kind of had that preliminary assessment as to what the impact has been so far. Now that we're about 2 months in, what is the status? What are members saying about the level of difficulty they've been facing?
Marlene, the crude reality remains very much on the negative side. We see the number of unemployment increasing because many of the properties, and Stuart can relate to this, they were trying to keep their staff on board for even at reduced salary for as long as possible, but now they're reaching a point where they no longer can afford to do so. So they're going to begin to lay off. You saw what Tropicare did this week. That is just one of the many stakeholders that is going to have to. It's not a matter of they wanting to. It's something that they have to because their monies have depleted and they cannot continue without the international market.
Yeah. Stuart, what's happening in Placencia? Tell us that perspective.
Things are pretty grim, Marlene. I think when this thing first started, let's call it mid-March, I think a lot of the owners and operators of tourism-related businesses really did not understand what the long-term implications might be. So you had various properties that came out very heroically and said, well, we're not going to lay off our people. We can get through this. Not realizing that what we're talking about, it's not a 1 month thing. It's not a 2 month thing. It's not a 3 month thing. It's minimally, it's an 18-month proposition. And if you didn't think it through that hard, now you're in the position where, like John said, you've kept your employees, but you're going to run out of money. Some of us will run out of money next week. Some of us will run out of money next year. But every tourism operation at some point within that 18 months, even the healthiest one, is going to run out of money. And that money's got to come from someplace, whether it's bank, whether it's bringing in new shareholders, whether it's selling assets, or as BTIA is proposing, we need the country, the government needs to make a plan for the long-term recovery of the tourism industry. And the best way to do that is to help us access long-term, low-interest loans from the international financial institutions. That's really the only long-term way out that we see.
You know, when you think of the complete shutdown that took place, and I don't mean our state of emergency shutdown, I mean when the cancellations started and people were no longer even able to travel to get to destinations like Belize, you were facing the impact long before. I think we very often only talk about the direct impact, but in places like Placencia, you have a lot of other businesses that do suffer just because the tourism industry isn't booming. How would you explain that scenario, Stuart?
I'm not sure I understand, but I mean, you're saying what is
the indirect impact on small businesses in places like Placencia?
Oh, it's huge. Mm-hmm. Whether it's San Pedro, whether it's Placencia, whether it's Hopkins, whether it's even parts of the Cayo district. Mm-hmm. At some point, there's an old saying that economists use. When your neighbor loses her job, it's a recession. When you lose your job, it's a depression. So essentially, the economic impact is spreading throughout the nation's whole economy. If I don't have a job, I'm not going to buy anything that I don't have to buy. It's as simple as that. So it's inevitable that down the line, every business is going to suffer. Down to the taxi driver, down to the grocery store, everybody.
And
Yeah,
have you been?
Marlene?
Yeah.
Just to add to what Stuart said, when you look at the economy, I think we're really learning now just how much the tourism industry really contributes to the economy. I mean, look at the surpluses of food that has been by the Mennonites. Too much chicken, too much eggs, too much milk, the cows, all of this because the tourism sector is not purchasing in bulk anymore. So it's trickling down to a large for them to having a large surplus. They don't have that demand. So that gives you a pretty good idea of where we are. And remember, the tourism sector employs about 150,000 people. And these people being laid off, that means people don't have that spending cash. So it will trickle down to every other sector in the country of Belize.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you are putting forward proposals as to how to move forward. What is the level of engagement that BTIA has? Is there a committee being put in place? Who's coming up with the action plan as to how we move forward?
I can start to answer that.
Yes.
The tourism sector as a whole, it's a lot of different, has a lot of different parts to it.
Yes.
From cruise, tour operators, hotels, airlines. We're all in contact with each other. And through our research and talking to all our membership, there's a lot of different ideas out there. But the one idea, the one proposal that basically all of our membership has signed off on is the need to take a long-term look at the big picture. Certainly the common denominator has to do with the financing and the provision of long-term low-interest loans, because that's a need that is not being filled. I'm not going to fault the banks. The banks are not set up to provide that kind of financing. They have done a very good job in short-term renegotiation of loans, and that's been a big help for many of us. But again, if you look at this as a long-term problem and not something that just is going to come and go away like a hurricane, that's where we think it's most important to dialogue with government. Government has done a terrific job in meeting the emergency needs of the country, both in terms of the health aspect, which, as you know, we're one of 10 or 12 countries that have remained COVID-free for over a month. That is an unbelievable accomplishment, and the health authorities and government in general should be congratulated, as the general population of the country. But what we have not seen so far is a long-range plan for how to get the economy back on its feet. And I think most people will understand that because the tourism industry plays such a large role in the economy, that's where you have to focus. You have to keep these tourism businesses alive for the next 18 months. Let's take that as an arbitrary amount of time, because if your businesses start to go under, when this thing is all over, there will not be the jobs coming back. If I have 110 employees and I'm no longer in existence, that's 110 more people that are out of a job that will be looking for a job, sorry. And those jobs just won't be there, because whatever you may say, 2019 levels of tourism are not coming back for a number of years. We have to face that.
Now, there's been a lot of hope placed, and people, we definitely hear different parts of the sector talking about opening up air travel once again and allowing tourists to return. When you say that we're not going to get the 2019 levels, are we being, do we have a false optimism about what opening the airport is going to be like?
You use that term, Marlene, not me, but I don't think you're
I'm
far.
asking.
I think there, in this whole virus, there's a lot of magical thinking going on that we see it certainly when we turn on the news in the United States. But hoping for something and thinking that something is going to happen does not make it happen. If a vaccine was developed tomorrow, that would be the most fantastic thing in the world. But can you bet the survival of your business on a vaccine being created and manufactured and distributed globally tomorrow? I think we have to be realistic about that. And I think the realistic approach is that even if you open the airport tomorrow, we really don't know who will come. It's that simple.
And we know that, shifting a little bit from international travel, we know that, of course, recently restrictions have been lifted to the extent that now Belizeans are being allowed to travel locally, and the Prime Minister has already gone on record to say that the government is now encouraging people to participate and engage in local tourism. Do you foresee that that's going to have a positive impact, at least short term, or if not, how do you think that now that things are starting to open up little by little, is there going to be any relief to the tourism in the sector as a whole?
If you're asking personally as a hotel operator, I think this upcoming 3-day weekend, I think the hotels that are open will do some much needed and much anticipated business. But I look at it more as a morale booster. So we're bringing back some of our laid off staff, and the other hotels are opening, we'll do the same. And that's great for staff morale. It gives people hope. 3-day weekend, that's great. Our next 3-day weekend isn't until September. So we don't know what kind of local business will be done between now and September. I applaud the BTB for pushing it. It's a good idea, but I don't think, I think from an economic standpoint, it's going to be somewhat marginal. There may be certain areas, I would suspect Kikocker might get a bigger boost out of it, say, than San Pedro. But we're dealing with uncharted waters here, and we won't know till we find out.
Yeah. Now, it's not that all properties are reopening for local tourism. John, what would you say is the percentage that is going to open up and those who chose to remain closed?
Well, we conducted a small survey a couple of weeks ago, and most of the properties are more than ready to start their operation. And one of them told me that they need at least 72 hours for them to be able to open. In terms of the total number that are going to be available, I think what was, as Stuart mentioned, many of them are going to be doing the trial run, basically to see how feasible it's going to, economically, it's going to be for them to open to the local travelers. The size of the operation has a lot to do with it. For the bigger properties, they would need a lot more of what the local tourism offers. For the small and medium properties, they have a better chance of being able to, because it's a smaller operation, their operational cost is a lot less than what it would be for a larger property. So in terms of for the smaller properties, I think it will offer them a good opportunity to receive some much needed revenue so that they can continue to stretch their dollars and to remain in operation. But it's hard to say what is the percentage. What we have seen with our members is that we are promoting their special local promotions on our website, and we keep getting more promotions as we go along because we're reaching out to them. And this applies to not only to the hoteliers, this applies to the restaurants as well. And even tour operators are getting on board by offering their services at a much lower reduced prices. So we do see the positive economic impact, but we gotta wait and see how long it can remain, because you gotta keep in mind that a lot of people are reducing their monthly salaries, because the private sector in a lot of ways are taking the measures of reducing the employees' monthly salary. I mean, you heard of BG doing that, and I know BTIA has done that with our staff, and I know many other institutions are going to be able to do that. So overall, you have the less disposable income, and this will only increase as time passes, because there will be a lot more people that are going to have less disposable income available to any leisure or any vacation mode.
Yeah. So what I hear from you is that for some places it will be to open for local tourism may actually be at a loss for them, and so some are choosing not to.
Yes, that's the reality. That would be more for the larger properties, because their operations are a lot bigger and they require a lot more staff. So when they have a reduced price, they would need larger number of businesses for them to be able to reach that break-even point and be able to see a little surplus. Yeah. But I think most of them, many of them, I wouldn't say most, I wouldn't want to say most, will be happy to see some level of revenue coming into their properties. I mean, like Stuart mentioned, I think he has a certain good business for this weekend, but then thereafter, what happens?
Yeah, and what you painted, I think, is a very realistic picture. I think people may take advantage of a long weekend, but it's not that we will have tourists moving, or Belizean tourists moving around the country during the week or every weekend. So it will have, there's a limit as to how people will be able to spend. So if we look at what we're facing right now, there's so much uncertainty. You give a measure, Stuart, of 18 months for recovery, and even then we may not be seeing what was looking like it was going to be record-breaking numbers for the season. What are some of the dependent factors? I want to get into your conversation about the financing aspect, but let's look at what operators and owners are looking at externally to be able to kind of gauge what the long-term impact will look like.
Well, the big question, Marlene, is will tourists come back to Belize or come back anywhere? Remember, this is not just a Belizean problem. Nope. This is a global problem. Every country in the world, every prime minister and president in the world, every state governor, mayor of every city is struggling with the exact same problem. And the big question when it comes to tourism is, when will people, in our case in North America, because that's our main market, when will North Americans want to travel again? When they do want to travel again, where will they go to? What modes will they use to travel? Let me give an example by asking you a question. Okay, you've been cooped up for a while. You want to now take this long weekend to go on a vacation. Let's say you want to come down to Placencia, and of course you're going to drive your car and you're going to come have a good time. What if I told you that the only way you could get to Placencia was on a crowded bus or a 4-hour bus ride? Would you still come to Placencia?
No, I wouldn't.
No, probably not.
Okay.
Especially if you're getting to a what we're calling ourselves a COVID-free destination, but it requires a risk in being able to travel, and we still don't know what air travel is going to be like. But you talk about the willingness to travel, but what about the economic situation?
Go ahead, John.
No, well, what I was going to say is that there's a percentage of travelers, whether from the US or Canada, which are some of our primary markets, that are going to be able to travel. They are readily willing to travel as we speak now. But at the same time, they want to know that they're safe. They want to know what level of risk they're going to be exposed to. And that is what basically comes down to. right now, I'm very happy to know that Belize is positioned in a very good light because we haven't had any cases over the last 30 days. So that puts us in a very good position. The other point that we have on our favor is that we're very close to the US. It's one flight away for them to come to Belize. So that puts Belize in a very good position. But what we need to do is now we need to ensure that we have all the right protocols and guidelines that we're going to follow to ensure that our staff is secure and that the guests are secure by being protected from acquiring this virus.
You know, and I actually wanted to ask more about that. What sort of conversations have been taking place in terms of the long-term prospects of the industry? Because we know, COVID is going to be with us, and it's going to be a reality that we're going to live with for at least the next, few months or so. What ideas have been thrown around in terms of balancing, of course, people's economic welfare, but with their health and safety, and what sort of measures are perhaps the industry is going to put in place to, one, keep its people, to keep employees and all workers safe, and also ensure that people are still going to be able to enjoy the tourism product and continue travel, because we want to, of course, avoid another outbreak, and we want to keep our vulnerable population safe.
Every tourism business is struggling with that same question, and everybody is in the protocols that they're going to institute to solve that same question that you're asking. And in a way, this early opening for local tourism is a great warm-up for when we open up internationally. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons why the hotels that are opening to local traffic, that's one major reason why we are doing it. Because I don't want to put it in a funny way, but our local guests are kind of going to be guinea pigs for when the foreign guests come. It gives us a chance to test out our protocols. And I think most hotels will be going all out to establish and test those protocols. Mm-hmm. I think that's the easiest problem to solve. Again, the tough thing is going to be to look at the numbers of visitors that are actually going to come. And I think, as John was saying, they have to evaluate their own risk. And certainly amongst countries outside of North America, Belize is at the top of the list because we're COVID-free and because we're close. Mm-hmm. That was what John was saying. So in that sense, we're really in a good position, but we still have to get over that larger hump of fear. And we have to be careful here, not just to rely on anecdotal evidence. Okay, so we get calls in our reservations department every day from people who have stayed before or people who already have reservations with us saying, oh, we want to come. When is your hotel going to open? Okay, and if you just base your opinion on that, you would think, man, people are dying to come to Belize. Let's open yesterday because we're going to get all this business. However, when you look at the data done by reputable polling institutions, and this has been documented in many webinars from reputable places, the traveling public in North America is still very fearful. Yeah. And while there are those who will come back, it's not the kind of numbers that are going to be encouraging to the industry, at least not in the beginning. Yeah. So you might be looking at hotels operating at 5 or 10 or 15% occupancy. No hotel can operate at 5 or 10 or 15% occupancy, or tour company or airline. So these are the kind of things that business owners have to grapple with.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is you're breaking down why we need to kind of come to terms that this idea of a rebound in tourism industry isn't as quick as we assume it's going to be. One is definitely whether people will feel comfortable traveling, but also it's for us to be able to clearly acknowledge our risks as well, as we see in the United States, where they've just not been able to get a good handle on containing their outbreak as well.
And that's something we cannot control. That is totally beyond our control.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not a good position to be in. And I'm trying not to be pessimistic. I'm trying to be more of a realist. That the time to visit your banker is not the day you run out of money. You need to visit your banker months before you run out of money and have a very frank conversation. And that is essentially what BTIA is saying to government, a government that has done a great job up until now. And we're saying, all right, let's start to think long-term now. And yes, long-term low-interest financing is just one part of the mix, but that's what we're focusing on right now, because that's something that we can all agree on that is going to be necessary to really save the industry in any shape that we would recognize it.
So this proposal that you're putting forward and being able to access financing through international financial institutions, low interest, long term, talk to us of what the recommendation includes in terms of disbursement. There's a limited amount of capital available because everyone across the Caribbean, across the world, is trying to figure out a solution. So if we get a certain amount of capital available, how would you imagine that would work for so many places that will need the assistance?
You have to start somewhere. I mean, ideally, in other words, government accesses IDB, CDB, World Bank, IMF, those kind of institutions, because that finance can only be accessed through a government. Just how at the beginning of the crisis, Mr. Barrow enumerated different international financial institutions that have expressed a willingness to work with us.
Yes.
What we are saying now that those funds, well, will hopefully arrive, but that the institutions provide the kind of help that a government asks for. What we're saying, it's time for government to sit down with the private sector, with the tourism industry, and say, all right, for your long-term survival, what are the kind of things that will help you the most? And I'm saying those same institutions that are helping provide emergency food aid and poverty aid also have windows open for long-term low-interest loans. And that's all we're saying, is that's where we think the thinking should be going now. In terms of administration, you have institutions like the DFC that are perfectly capable of administering these kind of loans. Now, the implications of your question are, oh, there will never be enough money to go around. Well, there will never be enough money to go around.
Now, I think my question is, what do you propose in terms of how people will access and that those who are in the greatest need will be able to access first?
For any loan, there's criteria, whether you're borrowing from the credit union, from the bank, or from your best friend, you have to establish criteria. We're not talking about a bailout or people or institutions handing out money. There are procedures. These loans are going to have to be collateralized and otherwise secured. The institution that is supervising the lending is going to have to look at your company's financials. It's going to look at its history. If you're a company that just started out 6 months ago, chances are you're not going to be at the head of the line for that kind of assistance. There may be a different window for small businesses, a different window for large businesses, because the risk entailed is different for those different kinds of propositions. But this is nothing new. I mean, it's not a great technical challenge to administer a long-term loan program.
Yeah. You know, as you're speaking, what comes to mind is the local institutions had spoken about the relief efforts that they were offering, and I know it was usually a personal negotiation with your banking relationship officer, but they had initially said 3 months in moratoriums, in looking at relief in overdraft what happens at the end of these 3 months?
Why we're making the proposal we're making.
Yeah. No, I'm serious. Let's think of the operators who are taking advantage of this 3-month relief. At some point, even the local banking institutions will have to close off from the relief that they're offering. What do you imagine will happen if that is the scenario?
Well, in the first instance, you try and stretch the 3 months to 6 months. What exacerbates the problem in Belize is that we are a high interest jurisdiction. They argue forever about why the interest rates are so high in Belize, but let's leave that alone for a minute. Trying to operate in a climate of high interest rates for a business, that means when you borrow money, and virtually every business needs to borrow money to develop its business, your margin of error, if you're paying 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% interest rate per annum, your margin of error is tiny in the best of circumstances. Everything has to go right for you to succeed in business when you're borrowing at those interest rates. Now you throw in the crisis, okay? So you're getting a moratorium, but this is not a free moratorium. This is a moratorium, let's say it's a moratorium on all payments, but the interest continues to run. It's just like maxing out your credit card, okay? At some point, that interest upon interest is not helping you. It's hurting you. So again, I'm not faulting the banks. They have their own considerations to take care of. They have to stay in business too. The last thing we would ever want to see in this country is a bank failure.
Yeah.
Just like I think in the tourism industry, the last thing we'd ever want to see is one of our local airlines or both of our local airlines going out of business. That happens, and you're really talking about massive carnage for the future of the industry. So even before the hotel industry, I'd say let's take a close look at the airline industry. Those guys have to keep going. Yeah. It's all very interrelated. The banks will play a large role, but the infinite moratoriums from the local banks is really not the answer to our problem.
Yeah, and probably not realistic either. So we're looking at one recommendation, and that's being able to access low-interest, long-term loans through financing that is offered from international financial institutions. What else are you envisioning will be of some assistance to the entire sector, from the small business operators right up to the large business operators, and even some of those who are hoping, investors and people who have been hoping to open up this year or next year?
Marlene, everyone has their ideas, and the first thing people focus on is, let us not pay GST, let us not pay business tax, let us not pay Social Security. It's kind of a tax-based approach. Yeah. I'm not sure that's a great way to go, because I recognize that government needs its own funds. When government is broke, all of us suffer. I think the thing, looking from a BTIA point of view and from a private sector point of view, and even from the larger national picture, is I think we need to look at the labor law situation. Okay, Belize has a set of labor laws. Those laws, everyone, even the labor commissioner agrees, those laws were not created with a crisis like this in mind. Okay, so boom, this thing comes down, and suddenly every employer in the country is trying to go through their dusty old labor book and look at the law and what I can do, what I can't do. But this all came so suddenly that basically it was I won't say panic mode, but everyone was looking at what can I do. The result is twofold. Because many employers acted hastily with good reason, because we had to act hastily, both to help our employees and help our own businesses. We did things that, let's say, were not exactly in accordance with the existing regulations. I mean, as you know, if you're going to formally dismiss someone, you have to go through a number of steps, whether it's for cause, whether it's not for cause. it depends upon what papers they signed to begin with, but we all did things that maybe were not exactly according to Hoyle, but they were necessary. I think we need to make sure, and this is from the governmental point of view again, we need to very quickly take this as a very serious crisis and say, you know what, let's use common sense to figure out how both employers and employees can have their status regularized without causing indelible harm to either side. So that's part number one. Let's look back, see what we've done, get that straightened out, and to everyone's mutual satisfaction. But the second half of that is now, in preparing for the future, we really need to make labor laws more flexible to cope with the new way that industry is going to run. No place is going to go back to run the way it was before. Just how over the last couple of decades you've had, let's say, the security business. Ago, industries or businesses used to hire their own security guard.
Yeah.
Got an old guy with a rusty shotgun that's standing out in front of your business, probably falling asleep. Now we've moved to hiring security companies. So we contract out a lot of that business. Unless the labor laws change, we may wind up contracting out large segments of the tourism industry. I might contract out my kitchen labor. I might go to a company that's going to supply me with housekeepers. So I'm not employing 15 housekeepers. I have a contract with a company that hires housekeepers. So it gets me out of the employment business. And that may be a way we have to go, but I don't think it's the best way. I think if we made our labor laws more flexible, it would be better for everyone.
Yeah. Would you be a bit more specific and explain what type of challenges you ran into when your property closed, or other hotels, when the properties closed, as to whether or not you would lay off, whether they were furloughed? I know one of the main conversations was in a state of emergency, because it's imposed by government that employees, in fact, did not need to, it was not mandated that they had to be paid.
Well, you asked for examples. Let me give you a couple very pertinent, specific examples. Okay, so when this thing hit, my first reaction, having fortunately spoken to Social Security Board in a BTIA seminar that we conducted, we learned that if you keep an employee on for 8 hours a week, they still stay on the Social Security rolls. There's no danger if they get sick or anything like that. So my first plan was to keep all of my employees on for at least 8 hours a week. They didn't even have to necessarily do much work, but if 8 hours would keep them on the Social Security rolls, they were still employed, they wouldn't have a break in service, and 8 hours a week I could afford to do. I'm not sure how long, but I knew I could do it to a certain extent. Okay, now along comes, virtually within a few days of my decision there, government says, hey, we've got this relief program going of $75 a week for 12 weeks. But if you are still employed, you are not eligible for the $75 a week.
Yeah.
So now I have to go back to the drawing board and say, wow, I can't, this 8 hour thing it doesn't make sense, because my employees will make more money if I dismiss them, and they can then collect the government $75 a week instead of 8 hours a week times $6 or $7 an hour, let's say. It made sense for the employee. It made sense for the employer. Okay, but it meant that I had to send those employees home in order to get their government help. Okay, then the next thing that comes down is the lockdown, where you could not travel from your home to your place of work. So at that point, let's say half of my workers are commuting from Mango Creek, from Santa Cruz, from wherever. I have to tell them, or they have to tell me, boss, I can't come in because government says I can't, there's no buses, I can't drive my private vehicle, so they can't come to work. So the question is, are they resigning because they can't come? Or am I firing them because they can't come? You can't really answer that question. But the fact is they're out of work. but they don't want to be dismissed. They don't want to lose their seniority, severance. And so these are questions that all of us had to grapple with just in a very short space of time. Yeah. And you do the best you can, but mistakes are going to be made. Yeah. There were other hotels that have been open a long, long time that if they dismissed every employee, employees who have been there sometimes 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and the severance pay that they've accumulated, who can afford to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in severance? Mm-hmm. So you make your arrangements that might not be entirely according to what the regulations say, but you got to have some flexibility. And it's a very real problem that virtually every employer in the tourism industry is getting.
Yeah, and I think outside of tourism, I heard quite a few of those exact examples in other forms of private sector as well. So there were many difficult decisions to be faced. So looking now, moving forward at the labor law to ensure that there is enough room that in this type of emergency where no one can predict, there is some kind of space for you to be able to make solutions that work best for both the employer and employee. Let me divert back to your suggestion in terms of financing, because now that you've mentioned your employees, clearly when people hear conversations like this, they'll think, okay, well, the business is protected, but what about us as the worker? What does that mean for us?
Marlene, every person out there that has lost their job does not want, in the first instance, a handout or a food basket. They want their job back. The only way people are going to get their jobs back is if the people who employ them are in a state of financial health that allows them to bring their employees back. It's that simple. It's not employer versus employee. Both employers and employees want the same exact thing. They want to survive and eventually prosper. Nobody is arguing with that. That's why we have to look at the big picture.
Yeah. And your current staff, how much have you had to cut down?
Out of a staff of 110, Marlene, we had to lay off 81. Yeah. We've kept 29. The security, some landscaping, some maintenance, that kind of thing. Yeah. Food and beverage, just to feed the 29 employees that are still there. So we've got 29 employees out of 110 still working with us, probably half of whom have had their pay reduced by 20%. That's where we stand.
And that would be the same situation all around, John?
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality I've been hearing from members from across the country in all destinations, from Toledo to Cayo, Corozal, Rinjoaki. I mean, and those number one and number two destinations, San Pedro and Kikaka, they can tell you they're going to increase the number of persons that are going to be relieving. It's inevitable. And this is what we're trying to propose right now, that government gets on board with the private sector. Let us look at long-term financing that can be made available. Let's revise the labor laws to see how they can benefit the employees and the employers. We gotta look at what would be a suitable date for opening the border. Let's have things in place so that we can protect ourselves, the population, the staff, and the tourists when the time comes to visit Belize and to be able to access Belize. But I can tell you, we have to accept the fact that not all businesses are going to be able to survive. It's unfortunate to say that and to think of that, but that's the reality. Many of them did not see this coming. Many of them had just done some refinancing, had just acquired new assets, they have expanded their operations, and overnight they are down from earning $1,000 a month to earning $0 a month. And then you don't know for how long. So as I mentioned earlier, the longer we don't have the full tourism industry open for business, the more it's gonna trickle down to people not being employed, and for more and more tourism businesses to shut down.
And speaking of the borders opening back, something especially that Marlene said earlier is that perhaps our traditional tourist market, or the countries where we usually see the most numbers from, and I'm talking specifically now about the U.S., Canada as well, the U.K., are experiencing extreme difficulties in managing their situations. So even if the border does open up, there is still, especially if we're looking in the next few months, there would be sort of a high level of risk of exposure and bringing COVID possibly back into the country. I'm wondering if there's a possibility that we might see, or if there's any ideas for us perhaps to shift and expand into new tourism markets. I don't know, perhaps maybe regionally. We're looking at South America, maybe other parts of the world. Are there any sort of ideas floating around as to how, when the border opens up, the tourism is going to be managed, and the areas which we might be looking to get people from?
I mean, remember that this is a global phenomenon that we're experiencing. The pandemic is global. So in terms of finding new markets, there really won't be new markets. What we have to look at for Belize to be able to open its borders is that we have to look at what is an acceptable level of risk that we would be willing to take to open our borders. And when I say that, it means that what measures are we going to put in place to, upon arrival, whether they come by land, air, or sea, in place to be able to secure our population and to secure the tourists. What is going to be in place to minimize the level of risk? I mean, that is key factor that we have to look into so that we are able to determine by when. And this will lead also to, because a lot of people are very keen on knowing when the international borders will be open. Yeah. I mean, this is something that we gotta trust the government, and we gotta trust that the government is looking at the economic and the health impacts and trying to find a balanced decision. If you're gonna tell us that you're gonna open until October and not July because the risks are too high, that's part of the conversation, but we have to look at the other components. So, and that's why we're saying, what financing are you going to be able to provide for us so that we can keep our staff employed, and so that we can, in a way, keep the economy moving and not remaining stagnant or coming to a complete halt. Yeah. So this is where we want to be able to have these discussions, these planning sessions with the government, so that we can have this economic recovery plan in place. And as we mentioned, I mean, tourism is comprising of 40% of GDP. You know how it trickles down to the other sectors. So by giving the focus to the tourism sector, you will be able to assist the other sectors of the economy as well. So in terms of finding the other markets, I think we have a very good understanding of who our key markets are and where we were expanding. What we need to look at now is what is the suitable level of risk that we as a nation would be willing to take for us to be able to open the borders. And we know that there's some work going on to develop protocols and guidelines that businesses can implement to protect themselves and to protect the tourists. But we need to have a good idea of what the recovery plan will be.
Yeah. And just a question here in terms of what the operators are saying about a potential opening of air travel come July. Are they all comfortable with that, considering the fact that we make it to that date with no new cases?
From our members, it's hard to say. I mean, most of them are saying yes, they're readily available to open in July. Like I mentioned, I did a survey a couple of weeks ago, and that was the phenomenon. But you look at it now, and the people's perspective changes by day, especially when you look at what's happening in the neighboring countries, when you see what's happening in Mexico. Mexico is beginning to get out of hand right now with a number of people ill with the virus and the number of deaths. You look at Guatemala as well. You look at the U.S. is still not under control, and it being our primary market. I mean that we cannot deny that fact. That the U.S. remains. It's about 70 to 75% of our tourist arrivals. So that presents a lot of complications in terms of opening the border, and we've been able to start in July. The PM, as you have mentioned, he's looking to have a rapid test. That is a lot of that decision of opening the international border relies on having that rapid test. I think when the rapid test is available, we're still going to be at risk.
Yeah.
How are we going to be able to? How willing are we to manage that risk?
Yeah. Now, and the health officials have clearly outlined how that would also bring challenges to depending on where they take the test in the point of embarkation or disembarkation. And the hope in local tourism, is there, I know Stuart mentioned that this is a long weekend. People tend to travel when they have more time. Interestingly, New Zealand just moved to 4-day work week, so they have longer weekends to encourage local travel there. Some people, those are some of the innovative ideas we see in other places. If we do end up in a situation where we can't open the air borders, just what can we do to really enhance some sort of benefit to come out of local travel?
Well, I mean, that example that you gave about New Zealand is a good example of a strategy thinking outside the box.
Yes.
And this is what our government has to look into, and the private sector has to look into. What can we do to promote local travelers? I'm very pleased to see how low the price of fuel is right now. That is an incentive for people to consider traveling from Cayo to Toledo, from San Pedro to Hopkins, because it's a little bit more affordable and less costly for you. So we really gotta begin to look at those strategies to look at it, and with the way our labor laws are structured, it would require that adjustment for us to be able to say, well, we're gonna have 4 days working week as being the new norm, so that people have long weekends, so that people can plan for long weekend vacations, have the opportunity to move around. Yeah. So we really have to zoom in and begin to have those discussions and really narrow into what would work for the needs.
Yeah. It's going to take a lot of creative thinking and perhaps even trial and error, I think, to be able to come up with solutions. In closing, gentlemen, I think that it's very grim when we have the conversation about the tourism industry, just because it was kind of an instantaneous fatal blow. But I'm sure that by virtue of your recommendations in conversations with operators, you do have to remain optimistic. What is your source of hope right now? What makes you feel that it won't be today, it may not be till next year, but what makes you optimistic that there will be eventually a rebound? Stuart?
We don't have any choice but to be optimistic, Marlene. We're human beings. I think by nature, don't want to give up. All I would say, though, is just a couple of things. One, we have to stay calm and we have to stay smart. Smart and strong and safe. You can't panic. You have to keep working at it. We're smart enough and strong enough to beat this. Number two, it sounds pretty strange, but Belize has always been a very lucky country. If I had my choice, I'll take luck over brains any day. And I think if the combination of luck and brains is going to get us through this. But if I may one more thing, especially in the social media age, it's very easy to be a critic, to point fingers, to say, oh, here's what we need to do, and why don't we do this and all that. Try and put yourself in the shoes of our decision makers and our national leaders. We can have our quarrels with our politicians all day, and those quarrels are legitimate. But you know what? We have elected people just for this reason, to to get us through a crisis. And I happen to think, and I think most objective people would realize that people like the Prime Minister, people like Carla Barnett, people like Chris Coy, people like Dr. Manzanero, the people who have performed in this crisis so far, I don't see how you can say anything but that they've done a good job. So at some point, we've got our generals and our colonels. We have to place our faith in them, and they're going to make mistakes. And we might make other recommendations, but you know what? There comes a point when you have to put your faith in your leadership. I think we're lucky to have the leadership from both parties, and let's go with it. The last thing we want to do is get back into partisan bickering and social media stupidity. I think we need unity, and let's stand behind our leaders. And trust me, I'm not the person who would normally say that.
Yeah, I'm very well aware of that. John?
Marlene, it's not the end of the world. You know, we Belize, in comparison to what is happening around the world, we're still in a very good position. We have been very fortunate to only experience the death of two Belizeans. You know, we have zero COVID at this point, you know, so there are a lot of good things. And you know, and we have already seen how we can come together, unite, and be able to approach this holding hands, you know, to make the best decision. You know, we have to give credit to the government of Belize for establishing that national oversight committee that basically embraced everyone. You know, so everybody was able to share their views, their recommendations, and to be able to be a part of the table to make these decisions and to continue still working on those decisions. I think that is a very good sign of how times can change, how things can improve, how a united front can really overcome any challenge or any obstacle, especially for a small nation like Belize. I think that it has set a new foundation for what the future decision-making process will be, whereby you have bipartisan support from all areas of the economy. And Belize, I know we're experiencing hard times, difficult times, but we're coming together. I know a lot of people are adapting. I've seen some of the creative stuff that Belizeans are doing, you know, going to their farming, going into providing free services to a lot of people and reducing their prices. And this is what we have to do. And I think everybody in Belize, we are all a small family, and we understand what we need to do to overcome and to recover.
All right. Well, thank you very much for checking in with us this morning, and we really do all hope that we can be able to see some solutions, some assistance, and something that will be able to get the tourism sector on better footing. Thank you very much, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be checking in on the Chiquibu. We'll have the representative of Friends for Conservation and Development talking about the forest fires they've been facing. So please stay tuned.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.